Today we're going to be working with M3D's crane quad. I recently had a melted fan shroud as well as some faulty motors. So today we're going to dismantle the entire head, go through the inner workings, as well as put on new motors and also installing that brand new fan shroud. All right, let's get to it. The first thing we're going to do is take the wire array apart. Keeping in mind as you do that, you want to hold the connectors and not the wires so that you're not pulling any of the wires apart from the connector. Once you've done that, you can put that to the side. The next thing we're going to do is take the belt off of the bracket. Take your gold clips and move them forward. Next, we're going to take our 8mm wrench and our 3-point hex wrench. Holding the screw here with your hex wrench, and then behind it, you're going to use your 8mm wrench on a nut that's behind that. And you're going to slowly untighten that. You don't want the wheel to come off totally. We just want to slowly untighten that nut, but we don't want to take it off. Now you should be able to kind of lift and pivot diagonally. And if you've released enough tension in that bottom screw, you should be able to wheel your head off while pivoting. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is take our 2-point hex tool and undo these 2 screws from the brackets. They're connected to the mounts that holds the head to the bracket. So you can put that off to the side. If you want, you can take your screws off so that you're not misplacing those. So one of the first things you want to observe is how the wires are wrapped around your brackets and how they go to your side fans. They wrap here and go up in here. So the next thing we're going to do is take the fan off of the shroud. Using your same 2-point hex tool, unscrew those and then unwrap it from the brackets. Again, you can take those screws up and put them to the side. So if we follow this, it is kind of snugged between our motors. Gonna just take that one off. Been wrapped there once. Might be wrapped a little differently. Put it to the side. Now that the back fan has been taken off, we can take these side fans out of the fan shroud. Those just snap out. Follow the trace wire. Put those to the side. So next you'll see that we're working with these screws that hold the fan shroud to the head. Using your same 2-point hex tool, take those out and put those to the side. Those are connected to the head by a couple nuts that are inside the head. Now that those screws have been taken out, we should be able to put a little pressure on the front of the shroud and with our thumbs on the back and just pop that off. And then we have our shroudless head. So while the shroud's off, we can look at a couple different things going on. So there's definitely some melting going on. I accidentally did not have my back fan plugged in. So for about 4 hours this was running without that, and you can see how the heat block was able to pretty much melt the entire section away, and it started to droop. And that's going to restrict the airflow that goes into that area, obviously if it wasn't flowing to begin with. And then it's going to start to droop within this area. Anyway, it's time for a brand new one. It's going to be this yellow one. So one of the first things that we'll note now that the shroud is off is that I've got lingering filament in the head. And there is a piece of filament in the zero tool that is likely in here that is not clogged, so we'll be able to heat this up and take that right out along with the rest of them. So we're going to do that independently, but I want to just open the head up and show you how that filament is likely put in there, and that way you'll have a better idea of how it's loaded and how it looks. Once we open this, there's going to be 8 tiny bearings. They're pressure locked in with the head and how it's pieced together. So as soon as you open this up, you want to be mindful that you have a towel underneath you, that you're on a nice working space where you're not going to be upset with yourself if those shoot across the room. So using your 2-point hex tool, you're going to take these left and right screws off as well as the top, and you don't have to take this one fully out for the nozzle, but you do have to undo it. Now again, because I have left the filament in here, which if you can retract it, I would very much advise it being retracted before you take the head off, as it's going to add a little restriction when I open this head up, and it will actually likely make those bearings shoot out a little bit more. So we're about to open it up. You can see the bearings are right there, and we just lost one. Didn't lose it, it's still in there, but that's what happens. It falls. If you're on a carpet, it's no good, but you can see it kind of floating there on the filament right now, and that's how you can easily lose these. Another one right there just kind of doing its thing, and that one finally fell. So a good thing you can do, especially if this is mounted, is you can kind of put your thumb in there, and by putting your thumb down, you can hold it in place and unsnap your filament. So normally when you take this apart, this is how it's going to look. On one side, you have your bearings that help your filament guide through along your gears, and then secondary bearings along your gears to keep them in place. That's sandwiched together, a mirrored version of itself. Again, same concept. And when they're put together, so we're going to take them out. And like I said, because they go everywhere, you want to just keep them in a good spot that you know you're going to be working with them. I like to have a little cup or something off to the side usually. If you don't have 8 of these, you have a problem and you need to order more. Your head will not work properly if you do not have all 8 of those working. So the next thing I want to do is, using a pair of pliers because it works a little better, is take the gear shaft out. That took a little more out than it should have. Interesting. Normally, that doesn't come out like that, which might be a problem, but I'm not sure because I've never run into it. But normally, I think these are solid. At least I've never had one come out like that. Let's see. Yeah, normally I can't pull that and it's a solid unit. This one seems to have come apart. And I don't know if that's a problem. But you can see that the bearings do get a little gunky here and there. So maintenance on these is somewhat needed here and there. So we should have 4 of those. Again, going on to the other head. And same thing happened on that one. Interesting enough. And that one too. This came out good. You can take them out with your fingers too if you need to. Sometimes you gotta wiggle them. And we should have 4 of these. So you also have 4 of these shaft pieces that go onto your motors. Now again, I mentioned that I don't normally think that these are supposed to come undone like this. And I've got 2 that do. And so I'm going to just put in 2 that don't do that because I've got some replacements. And I would think that you would want all 4 doing the same thing. So the next thing we're going to be doing is taking the motors off. And I want you to notice that there's only 1 screw, and technically goes on the left side of how the motor is placed. So if you're looking at the motor from the front and turn it with the back, with the wire being on the bottom, that's going to be your left side. Again, if you look at the bottom with your wire, your left side. So the 2 inner screw mounts is how you mount your motors back in place. If you mount them on the outer side, then you might crush the inner components of the motor. So it is suggested that we only use the inside screws. Using a 1 hex tool, your smallest hex tool, you want to get in there and take those screws off. They're not a big screw, and these also you do not want to lose. So that will release your motor. Same thing for the other side. So this head was put together before M3D started using spring washers on their motors, which are supposed to add a little more lenience to how the motors flex along the head and extruding the filament and loading it, especially for harder, more brittle filaments like PLA. I haven't really noticed a huge difference, but we're going to install them anyway so that you're aware of how to do that. And those are the spring washers. And these are the 2 nuts that hold the fan shroud together that sit on the inside here, here and here. Our nozzle sits into here, and you can see how each one of our filaments goes into the nozzle, and there are little clips here, and that helps pressure lock this when the nozzle goes in and the screw is tightened, holds that in place. So as you can see, there's nothing really special about this as far as being scared or intimidated once you're in it. It is a little complicated with all your stuff that goes inside. But like any other puzzle, once you've got all the pieces, it can go back together. I've got my fresh motors, and these are the screws that hold the head together. So right now we're going to put this all back together. As you can see, again, just to review everything, we have the spring washers that will be going onto our screws that are going to hold our motor onto our head. The screw nuts that will be going into the shaft holes that will be mounting our fan shroud to our head. These are bearings for our gear shaft that go into the holes here and hold the gear shaft in place along the motor gear head. And these 8 bearings, mini bearings, go into each one of these sockets and on top of the gear shaft to hold everything in place for pressure locking. Again, everything's going to go back together with these 3 screws when we're all said and done. So hopefully that's not too complicated and you're now less intimidated by the head, not more intimidated, but we're going to move forward. So the nozzle's nothing complicated, and as you can see, I got all this extra filament that's in there. So before we put the nozzle back into the head once it's reassembled, I'm going to fire up the crane real quick, put this in so that we're able to connect this, so that we're able to warm this up real quick and take that filament out. I will show you real quick just what I do to make sure that my shaft is nice and cleared. I will show you what I do real quick to show you how I clear my PTFE tube so that we know that is able to go back in and not run into any future issues when we start extruding. Let's get to it. So I'm going to just start with my back because it doesn't really matter what you start with, we just got to start. So when we're working with the head, a good way to know that these are in properly is you can actually see that that would look silly if we had it like that. So they naturally curve in, and again, that's going to look a little silly if it's like that. So the good thing is if they're aligned like that, you know you're good because they fit in properly. And that aligns our left holes with our left holes. So let's just deal with one at a time using your smallest hex tool. Get it down in place. And if you can, use your tool and hold it in. We're going to take one of those spring washers, set that on there like that. Now, holding the tool, if you can, with the screw, try to sit your motor in place as best as you can, and then trying to hold the motor down. Get the screw. Now, I'm going to be honest, I made that look a little easy as far as holding it. There is a bit of maneuvering once you do that. That spring should bring in a little flex to your motor. You don't want a lot, but you want a little. So once that's installed, you don't want that to be super tight. So just pull it off a little so that you can rock it a little, but not a lot. Okay, same for the next side. We're going to get that screw in place. Get our tool down. Flip the head. We're going to get the spring washer onto that screw. Huh. Maybe. You can see the spring in there. Try to the screw. So putting this down like this might help you maneuver things a little better. Just helped me. So installing these with the springs is a little harder. You might want to forego the springs. You might see a difference and you might not. So it's your call. Installing these without the springs is a little easier. Installing them with the springs should hopefully add a little more life to the motors and allow them to rock along with the way that the filament loads in. So that's one side, and now the other. So pretty much on the other side, you can just take what you've already done and pretty much do the same thing. We're putting the screw in the middle. Got our spring washer. And you're looking to get the screw onto this hole right here, as well as get this shaft into this hole. So again, you want the motor to rock a little, but not a lot. And you want to have some tension on the screw, but you don't want it really tight. So the motor should have a little play like that. Get that last screw in there. So I want to say there's no real easy way to do this with the spring mounts. It makes it very hard, so you might have to find your own way to do it. I just had to put this down several times just to try to get it in there. So again, as long as once you've got it on with that spring, you should have a little play, not a lot, and you don't want to have this super tight, but you don't want to have it super loose either. So now your motors have been put on. We want to take the motor shafts and put those back in. They do have a little notch, you can see, and those sit along the notch on the motors. They might just take a little wiggling, but they should go right in. The next thing that goes in along with those are the bearings, the larger bearings, 4 of those. And you might need to move the shaft around in order to get the bearing in, and a pair of tweezers to help you push those down along in there. Same for your other side. So now we're going to put the bearings back together. So we need to put one on each one of the gear shafts, as well as the hole that goes next to the gear shaft. Do the same for the other side. And then take your 2 remaining nuts to hold your fan shroud in place. and put those into the sides. It may take a little maneuvering to get into place. Take your other side of your head and slowly put everything back together. Again, we're putting these down in here and then these two right here. Just like this. So now back on the front, we're going to go back to our 3 screws that we had. I like to start with the right and left in these 2 holes. You can just start it. Same for this hole right here. And then your 3rd one at the top. Keep in mind you don't want to get your wire stuck in between your screw. So as you mount that, make sure your wire doesn't get put into place. You can tighten the top. Tighten the sides. Again, don't tighten too tight. And then you can keep your bottom one open and out so that we can get our nozzle back into place. So now that your head has been reassembled, we want to keep in mind that our nuts are right here and that they can move around for us, as now we're going to be putting on the fan shroud. So on the fan shroud, you'll see that there are 2 nubs, and those are going to sit in place here. Moving your wires out of the way. So these 2 right here and right here are what these 2 notches are going to go into right there. Skirt that up and lock that into place. So now you should be able to see your nut. We'll be using our 2-point hex tool to put that screw back into place into the nut. Nice and tight. And the same on the other side. If you can't see your nut, just give your head a little wiggle. Nice and tight. So now our fan shroud has been reattached. All right, you can move your wires down along the sides if you desire to. And next we're going to install the fans into the shroud, starting with the right side, making sure that your slot goes down into the hole. Our wires go off to the side here. This just snaps into place. We're going to put the other one in, and making sure the opening is down. Snap it into place. Your wires should go along your back here. And depending on what you've got for slack, we want this up here so that this wire can go up in here and play within that area. So you might want to just take your back and kind of work it in between these 2 motors there, just so that it's snug and in a spot. And then once you've got that there, you can bring that down here. So it'll look like that. All right, next we're going to put the fan on the back. You want to keep in mind that the sticker is going to be facing inside. Using your 2-point hex tool, going to, on our fan, put our screws in here, here. I'm gonna make sure that our wire isn't in our area here, and just scooch that up along the bracket. Get those screws in place there. Moving our wire. This back fan you need pretty straight along the fan shroud, as you only really have an 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch play where the fan sits and the lower wheel on the plate sit. So you don't want that touching the fan and not allowing it to move. So now that that's been installed, you can take the fan's wires and wrap them zigzag around the brackets just enough so that you can bring that wire up to meet the other fan wire, and also, if you can, snug that in between the two brackets. Just kind of clean everything up so that those two fan wires sit in the back. And for the most part, that's back together. Now we're going to get the mount back on. So we're just going to get that and put it back on with those two remaining screws. I want to make sure those are nice and tight. And your head has been somewhat put back together. We're going to get it back onto the crane itself and get our nozzle back in once we clear it out. So congratulations, you've dismantled your head and you've put new motors back on it, you've put it back together, you've put a new shroud on it, and you've got it back on the plate. So let's get it back on the quad and get the nozzle cleaned up. To getting this back on, we should be able to just angle it back on and roll it if this wheel didn't get any tighter while we were working with it. So you can kind of just put it on and rock it on, and again, if this wheel still isn't too tight, you should be able to just kind of rock it on place. Use your 8mm wrench back on that and your 3-point X tool. Hold the nut and tighten that down. If this has any play, your eccentric nut is on here, and you should be able to move that left or right and tighten that down a little. So next we want to get those golden brackets put back on with the belt. So we'll put those in place. Sometimes it helps to use the pliers, and sometimes it's just easier to use your fingers. And then use the pliers. So now the belt's on, your head should move back and forth nice and freely. So using my included wire array, we're going to now put all this back together. The double black wire and the red and brown wire are your heat block and thermostat. So for now we're going to leave those alone. Your yellow and orange wire are going to be your two side fans. So we're going to plug that in. And your green and blue wire is going to be your back fan. And your 0 motor. And so blue is motor 0. And purple is motor 1. And orange is motor 2. And green is motor 3. So before we do anything else, this is a great time to showcase the wire mount. And this is the basic wire mount. And this is going to go on the back of our head and hold our wire from doing this back and forth. See, when I move the head back and forth like this, all those wires move around and we don't know if they're causing any kind of disconnect. So my wire mount that I've created is going to go on the back of our head. On the back of the head here, there's a 3M screw hole. We're going to be taking our wire mount and putting it right on that hole and putting our screw there. So then you take your wire wrap into the harness, just like that, and with a couple zip ties. I like to have a pair of pliers to just help tighten those down, and we'll snip them off. So now that we've installed the wire mount, you can see that those front wires don't move nearly as much, if any, how they were moving. So now all the support goes into that bracket, and this wire takes all the movement. To further improve this, normally this wire is just attached to this bracket with a zip tie, but we've cut that off and we've now made a wire harness bracket that will fit that into place and hold that into place better. So I'm going to install that real quick. To make sure you have enough slack, you want to make sure that you're moving your head to the opposite side and then move your wire along with your head to make sure that you've got enough slack. Once you feel you've got a comfortable spot, add your bottom part and slowly lock your screws in place. That and the wire harness, you've got a great ability to now improve the way that your head works. So we're going to plug her in. I'm just going to make sure I raise my Z-axis up slightly manually. I'm just going to hold on to the frame and lift that up. I want to have enough space for my nozzle to kind of just hang in place. So we're going to use the brown and red wire for my thermostat and the double black wire for my heat block. Just let that kind of sit there away from our brand new unmounted fan shroud. And we're going to just turn this on, and I'm going to put that up to 235 real quick so that I can take the filament out. So I like to hold the hot end with a pair of pliers, needle nose, and we should just be able to take out our filament now that we're up to temp. Now usually that's all you need to do to know that you're cleared of a clog. I like to take my smallest hex tool and go into each one of these holes and slightly push down until I can't push down anymore. And eventually any residue that's left in there should come up on your hex tool. So we're actually gonna lower the temp down to 175 real quick. Going down to 175 should allow the filament to come out a little easier once you start to try to push it down. And you can see that it comes out in a little glob here and there. You want to be careful not to burn yourself. It's going to be 175 degrees-ish, but you want to try to take out as much of that filament as you can, as it will help your next loading process. You don't have to go nuts with this, just as long as you, for the most part, feel like you've cleaned out enough. But you want to go from hole to hole. Again, staying away from your fan shroud because you don't want to melt it. But the key in this is to get your hex tool all the way down to the end of your nozzle. So by the time you have this cleared out, if you do it right, you should be able to put your hex tool to the length of your nozzle, which should be about that long. And so you can see that it's starting to push some of that element out. Again, you just want to go and keep doing that until you feel like you're clear. Keeping in mind that this could be pulling out your PTFE tube along the way, which you don't want. So I'm going to show you another tool that works really good. The PTFE tube is starting to come out of our nozzle. So that's not good. We don't want that. So using some rounded pliers, we're going to put those into those holes and push that back down into the element and make sure that it's straight. You want these, hot end has notches on the PTFE tube, and you want those along the flat edge of your nozzle. And we're going to just hook this up. We're going to put it back up to 235 because I'm not happy with the way that the nozzle's going in. So we're just going to take it out. All right, that's back up to temp for 235. You can see that PTFE has a bunch of cooks on it. It's pretty gross, but it's still usable. So now we're going to take that now that it's empty. You can see that it's still got some stuff in it. So we're just going to try to push the rest of it out. I'm going to try to put this back in and still use it, which kind of looks like I've not gotten everything out, but we're going to try it anyway. Just where sometimes a new nozzle is the best, which we might end up going with. Alright, we're back up to temp, so I'm going to try to put this back in one more time, even though I've totally jacked it up, which is probably one of the reasons why I couldn't get it back in. And then just make sure it's level. We're going to cool down the temp so that we can put the hot end into the nozzle. Alright, now that this is cooled down a little, try to get it back into the head. Make sure the screw is out. And we're going to untap these a little to give us a little room to get the nozzle back in. Making sure our wires are off to the side. So once you've gotten that into place, tighten up your top and your right and left again. And one of the main things we want to try to keep in mind that we're doing is pressure locking the nozzle in place. And so you'll see that the lip here gets pressure locked in once we start to screw this into place. And that head will lift up into place and pressure lock. Alright, we are officially done. We've installed the new fan shroud, new motor, wire harness, and the back wire harness. Now we just got to turn the quad up to temp and load our filament and make sure that our nozzle and everything is set in place. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope I've been able to help you figure out your quad fusion head a little better. I wish you well and happy printing. Thanks.